I'm standing near the top of a hill in Devizes, which is probably the last place you'd expect to find a canal. But there is one here, and I'll show you why in just a second. So here we are, a canal at the top of a hill. Why is there a canal at the top of this hill? Well, this is Caen Hill in Devizes, and this hill is the engineer of the Kennet and Avon Canal's solution to the problem that in order to join the Kennet and Avon efficiently, he needed to go up a huge long distance, or have part of his canal not be very efficient. He went with the climb up a hill approach rather than the not have a very navigable river. So up these locks you come. That's from Bristol, this is into Devizes, and that's what ultimately links the Avon part and the Kennet part of the Kennet and Avon Canal. People had tried to link the Thames and the Avon very frequently throughout history. It went all the way back to the Middle Ages. There was an attempt, and in the Civil War 4 separate bills were put forward to join the two rivers with a canal, although protectionism of the road industry and of fear of cheap Welsh wool put an end to that. Ultimately though, the Thames and the Avon were to be connected by the Kennet and Avon Canal. The Kennet is a river that heads into the Thames at Reading. Following it up you go through Newbury and Hungerford, and eventually you join the Kennet and Avon Canal, which goes to Bath and Bristol. These 29 locks bring the canal up from its level with the Avon, and it is quite astounding to walk along. They run for almost 2 miles. A lot of them in very close formations, so here's a lock, there's another lock down there, very, very close. That's one of the reasons that they have these great big ponds next to them, because the pounds between locks are very, very small and don't have enough water to refill with the amount of traffic that comes through them. It takes a skilled operator of locks about 6 hours to get a boat through here, sometimes 5, depends on how well they're doing, but nevertheless, which in those days meant that almost a whole day's work was just getting through these locks. The Kennet and Avon Canal was completed in 1810 and was the first way to link London and Bristol together by water trade, and was much faster than the roads nearby for heavy goods. Obviously a man on a horse could go a lot faster, but he couldn't bring with him several dozen tons of coal or wool or whatever. The lock's heyday was from its opening until about the 1850s. The opening of the Great Western Railway heavily challenged it, and traffic dried up pretty quickly. Canals often didn't make very much money for its investors. Only 1 in 10 canals made their money back within the investor's lifetime. They were incredibly expensive to build compared to railways, but before the railways these were considered the only practical way to move goods between rivers. It was a necessity of the times. The entire creation of railways was thanks to the canals, not this canal in particular, but the Liverpool to Manchester Canal. Most of the cotton mills were in Manchester. Liverpool was the dock to get the cotton in, and it was so corrupt and so slow. They used to say it took more time to get the cotton from Liverpool to Manchester than from India to Liverpool. And so the first railway was built up there to solve this problem and spread throughout Britain and the world. The last commercial shipment to come through here was in 1948. It was a shipment of grain. After that, the canal quickly fell into disrepair until by 1960 they were completely unnavigable. Throughout the 70s and 80s, volunteers worked to restore the canals. This one in particular was a priority for a lot of people. And it was eventually fully restored and fully reopened in 1990. and it has served as a tourist attraction ever since. Lots of people enjoy travelling along the narrowboats up and down the canal, and people just enjoy them as a feature of England, which is quite nice, as many bits of our industrial heritage do completely disappear when they're no longer needed. The design of lock gates has an ingenious simplicity to it. Their slightly triangular shape allows the weight of the water to help keep them closed. As gravity is constantly pulling the water downhill, it pushes on the two tops of the triangles. They try and press into each other, but they can't actually move. Only an individual can by pushing these great arms. Water is constantly sluicing through. The locks are not completely watertight, as you can see there. And at the same time, there's so much water is required to run all these locks that there is in fact a pump that was installed in 1996 to pump 5 million litres of water up to the top every day that these gates are used, just to keep sufficient water running through the locks. Especially during the summer, there are lots of tourists and day trippers who want the experience of doing these locks, and lots and lots of water just flows down the locks and out of the sluices at the bottom. In terms of tourism, there is a canal trust that looks after all the canals in England, and they usually maintain towpaths as well, which make them great places to go cycling and walking. They're usually very, very flat. This one is at a 1:44 gradient and is probably the steepest in the entire system, just because this is a very steep area. And so it's a wonderful place to go cycling or walking the dog, or just walking for fun. And so you'll find most areas where there are canals, plenty of places to park up every couple of miles, and it's a really enjoyable place to stop and walk, especially as, if you're lucky, there's lots of pubs, and you can go from pub to pub on your walk and get about 3 or 4 miles and then have to call a cab home. One thing that's sort of interesting about these locks is, despite the fact that they're all built by the same designer and presumably by the same navvies who dug out the canal, each and every lock is slightly different from each other, slightly different lengths, different pool size next to them. It's quite interesting how they are all ever so slightly different, despite presumably having been attempted to be made all the same, or at least very, very similar. Some of the locks are named. This one is the fundraisers lock, named in honour of all the fundraisers that helped reopen the lock. There's also an Elizabeth lock for Queen Elizabeth, who reopened it officially, and a number of similar other names just to commemorate certain things. At 29 locks, they have plenty of things to commemorate. So there we go. There are some magnificent swans along this canal. It is nesting time for them, so I'm not going to get too close. I'm quite happy to be on the other side of this canal. But at the same time, they get so many humans through this area. They're fairly happy with humans, quite comfortable. And they're not as horrible as geese. Geese are just the worst. From the bottom, all you can see is a sea of white lock gates all the way up to the top of that hill. It's quite an impressive sight in person, a little bit less so in camera, but still, that's pretty cool. I actually have to duck my head a little bit to get under this archway. It's surprisingly low. I guess there wasn't any point building it any higher, really. Cheapest that they could get away with. And so this is the canal on the other side of the flight. There's a few more locks which are technically part of it, but I'm not going to walk to them because they're a little bit further away. And they're not nearly as interesting. They're down there beyond the narrowboats. And this is what most of the canal looks like. very calm and pretty. That's the road bridge. Before the flight was finished, it was one of the last features of the canal to be finished, there was a tramway that ran from pretty much where this bridge is up to the top of the hill where the canal boats could rejoin the canal. So this is the first lock of the flight. 29-ish more to go, 29 in total. And I think I'm going to walk up. Before the age of the railways, these navigable rivers and canals were the fastest way to transport goods around the country. But that's being said, they weren't very fast. But a single horse and a couple of men could transport 40 or 50 tons of whatever cargo you wanted at the speed of one horse. Which isn't bad going, considering that when the roads were around, about 1 to 3 tons was about the maximum draw of a single horse. So it did work out quite well. But then the railways came and screwed everything up. Swans!